Welcome to the Cobb Cole podcast, where attorneys are of no short supply and your values are met. I'm Jess, the Marketing and Culture Manager here at Cobb Cole, and today we're going to talk to Anthony Aguanno, who is a civil litigation attorney at Cobb Cole. Welcome, Anthony.
Thank you.
I appreciate you being here today. I'm excited to have you.
Happy to be here.
So a little bit about Anthony Aguanno. He is a part of our civil litigation department. He does a little bit of everything in that department, I think. Kind of the guru of all things.
Jack of all trades, but
you also do a little bit of construction law.
do a little bit of that, yeah.
Yeah, well, you dabble in a few different places. Am I missing anything?
Most things you can argue about, I probably at least talk to someone about it. Property disputes, business disputes, contract, construction, HOA, condo,
literally everything.
If you can argue about it, I probably sat down with someone and talked to them about it a little bit. So,
okay. All right, good to know. A little bit of experience in a lot of different places. So what we're going to do to get started is we're going to do sort of a rapid fire version of the podcast where we ask the questions real fast and you're just going to say either like the first word that comes to mind or like a sentence that comes to mind. Wood's really failed at this, so just...
Great. Bring on the Freudian slips.
So we're looking for quick answers. This is symbolic of our time frame that we have to answer the questions. It's a forgiving 1 minute, which means it's really 2 minutes so you have to answer the 10 questions. I don't think anyone has managed to do it in the timeline that is suggested. We've been close, but I don't think anyone's really mastered it. So again, this is just kind of like a summary of what we're doing in the podcast. We're going to talk more about it later on, go more in depth with the questions. This is just your initial response or answer to the series of questions.
Gotcha.
Right?
Family Feud bonus round. Got it.
Family Feud round. I love that. That's the first time that's come up. All right. Are we ready, Anthony?
I guess.
Where are you from?
New Jersey.
Okay. How'd you land at Cobb Cole?
My mom's worked with the firm since she worked for the city 20 years ago, and Mark reached out when they had an opening.
Awesome. Why transactions or all the things that you do? Why have you chosen that?
My litigation's always been my background, and I like creative problem solving for people.
Why litigation?
It gives an opportunity for creative problem solving, and you never really see the same thing twice.
Okay. Who do you usually represent?
Now, both. My background is insurance defense, so I used to represent only defendants, and I'm happy to be able to be on both sides of it now.
Okay. New HOA, what's the first step for someone?
Homeowner or HOA itself?
Either or. You pick.
Pick
your poison.
If you have questions about the governing documents, consult an attorney.
Okay. Why does legal compliance matter for HOAs?
Because frankly, you can be exposed to fee exposure if you're not in compliance with the laws and those things, and it can become a very expensive problem for something that may not actually have a lot of monetary value.
Okay. What's the biggest mistake an HOA might make?
Again, not being familiar with the statutes and governing documents.
Why do homeowners seek legal help?
Oftentimes frustration, not understanding where to go for recourse, and just needing more information about the situation they're in.
How can homeowners avoid HOA conflicts?
Get things in writing, and again, be familiar with the laws and your governing documents.
𝘊𝘰𝘮𝘊𝘬. So you live in Orange City, right?
I do.
What does 𝘊𝘰𝘮 need right now that we don't have? Just quick answer. First thing that comes to mind.
More mom and pop restaurants.
I agree. Okay, so your sort of youth growing up, you said you're from New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
How long were you in New Jersey?
I moved here when I was 14. Yeah. So October 2005. So I was in high school when I moved here. So grew up as a kid there, but really at this point I'm a native Floridian.
Okay. Did you go to DeLand High?
I went to Pine Ridge High School in Deltona.
Okay. We're competitors. So no bad blood right now. So after you went to Pine Ridge, where did you go on to college?
Well, I dual enrolled while I was at Pine Ridge. So I got my associate's degree from Daytona State. And then 2 months after I got my associate's degree, I got my high school diploma, and then I went to the University of South Florida because at the time I wanted to be a chemical engineer, and somehow I'm here.
That's a bit of a leap.
You grow up and people always tell you, you're good at math, you're good at science, you'd be a good engineer. And so you just kind of listen to those things. Fortunately, I was also really good at arguing with my parents and they let me know. So when I realized I didn't want to be an engineer in law school or in undergrad, I realized that I could just pivot and argue for a living instead.
Sounds like the better of the two options.
You should see what engineer experts get paid.
Well,
I've had to pay those invoices. I'm like, maybe.
that's funny. So what was the sort of determining factor where you switched gears?
Actually, it wasn't really an abrupt transition. I'd always considered doing patent law, which is a bit of an intersection between the math and science and the
Yeah.
legal industry. I loved chemistry. I thought pharmaceutical patents were a super interesting concept, given how expensive those are, and so I was just really passionate learning more about the patent system because I just thought it was crazy to me that medicine that can help so many people could be so expensive. So for a period of time, I thought I could do both. And you get done law school and there's not as many IP jobs, particularly arguing against pharmaceutical patents and, rent's not cheap. So I ended up in litigation because I just needed to get my feet wet.
You didn't start your legal career at Cobb Cole. What was your sort of path getting there?
So I went to USF for undergrad. So after I graduated from Florida State, I wanted to move to an area where I would have the best support system for finding my first job. So I moved back to Tampa where my college friends were. I had fraternity alumni that, some of them knew attorneys and, just trying to get out there. They always scare you in law school and tell you, it's not easy getting your first legal job. And that's not entirely wrong. But I went down there. I lived with a friend for a little bit. And through a friend of a friend of a friend, I got an interview with a smaller firm doing construction defect litigation. And I ended up getting an offer and I was just eager to start. You have this gap between the bar exam and getting your job, and it's
A little agonizing.
it is because you spend so much time, studying for the bar exam, and it's almost like a full-time job. And then
Yeah.
next thing you know, you're just doing nothing, and you're like, all right, well, student loans are coming due soon. Like I can't just keep living at my buddy's place. And so, you get that job and you're just excited to jump into it. And it's like drinking from a fire hose, but it's exciting too, though.
Good. Why Cobb Cole? Why did you end up at Cobb Cole?
Well, my mom has worked for the city of DeLand for over 20 years now, and ironically does planning and land use with the city. So she's had an opportunity to work with Mark Watts and Mike Woods for years and years and years. So funny thing is, when I was actually applying to law school, I was talking to Cobb Cole attorneys for advice, Mark Watts, Ty Harris, and some other people that my mom knew, and they were super helpful in, navigating the process and, trying to figure those things out. And when I moved back to Volusia County in 2019, it was actually Mark Watts who I was reaching out to get some, just guidance on navigating the county. While they weren't actually looking for a litigator at the time, I had obtained a couple of offers, and he was actually giving me advice on which one he would go to. So I actually took a job with the firm that Mark recommended before I came to Cobb Cole. So they've
Part
always
of the stepping stones. Yeah.
they've always kind of been in the background. I've always had a lot of respect for the attorneys that work for the firm. My mom's always held them in super high regard, so I've only heard great things.
Neat. What spoke to you about the litigation department specifically?
Well, it's candidly really where my background lies. That's all I had done prior to that. I'd done a little bit of Social Security disability work, which isn't litigation inherently, but it's adjacent.
Right.
There's still a judge. So, everything I've kind of done has been in the realm of advocacy in that regard. And, it represented both an opportunity to branch out because Cobb Cole does a little bit of everything. So if I want to wade into the transactional pool a little bit and learn a little more about those things, trust estates, things, that maybe I wouldn't have the exposure to in a full litigation firm. So
Right.
that was a huge draw. But, litigation's nice because it gives you an opportunity for creative problem solving, particularly if you're proactive. Everyone thinks about lawsuits as being something that's about money, but, if you have good counsel and the other side has good counsel, there's a lot of in between that may not just be monetary resolution, and the opportunity to kind of work within those margins and try to help people find creative solutions to their disputes is, always exciting, and it's really rewarding when you can make one of those things work.
It's one of the practice areas that's different every day, I think.
There's
Yes.
broad categories, but no two cases are
Yeah.
really exactly alike, whether it's the financial circumstances of the party, nuance in the facts. I mean, a breach of contract seems like a breach of contract, but it's never quite that simple. And so,
Right.
you're always getting two sides, or potentially, depending on the number of parties, 3, 4, 5 sides of a story, and you're just trying to figure out what makes the most sense.
Who are some of your usual clients?
A little bit of everyone.
Loaded question.
Yeah, no, it's pretty diverse, and I think that's a big reason why I'm excited to work for a local firm as opposed to a large statewide regional insurance defense firm. Is I get to work with people who live here, and I get to see problems that are in the community, not just moving piles of insurance money across the table. So, I meet with homeowners, people who have, antique cars that they want to get fixed, neighbors who are arguing over a property line, construction issues, liens, defects, lack of payment, inadequate workmanship, delays, all kinds of things like that. And so it's really diverse. And like I said, so it's businesses, it's individuals. So and I like it all. It's all different, but yeah, kind of everybody really.
Makes it more fun that way. What to do when your HOA is just getting started? This is your sort of burning question of the hour.
Well, I mean, if you're a homeowners association, you're starting up. I mean, the first thing you need to start with is understanding your rules and your laws that are governing you. So, for a condominium association, you need to look to Chapter 718. For your HOAs, you need to look to Chapter 720. For the very rare timeshares, 721, which kind of overlaps with some of those issues. Become familiar with those statutes because those largely guide the minimums for requirements on governing documents. And so being familiar with what your rights are under the statute, what the state says you can and can't do in the operation is a key starting point. Beyond that, it's worth consulting an attorney because if you're starting an association, that's a legal entity. So you're getting an incorporated entity started. Entity formation, understanding the implications of taxes and things like that are super important. So it's good to have good counsel to make sure that you're incorporating and organizing the entity in a correct manner, as well as understanding the laws and things that you're bound by so you can make sure that in incorporating that entity, you're making sure that you're keeping that in mind and that's guiding the way that you form it. Beyond that, having good counsel who understands either Chapter 720, 718, or 721, and making sure that your governing documents are, in compliance with the law and they reflect the way that you want to operate it. A big thing with homeowners associations are things like architectural review committees and things like that. People want to make sure that they have uniformity in their communities, and I get that. But you need to make sure you understand the rules on that because it's not just as straightforward as saying, hey, we have an architectural review board and they say what goes. Like,
Right.
it's much more complicated than that. And then on the other side of it, there's lots of disputes. So you have to understand what a dispute looks like, what are the implications, and what does that mean for you. So understanding the entirety of the undertaking on the front end, I think is super important. And I think the way you get a good foundation is hiring good counsel, making sure you're incorporated properly, making sure that the person that's helping you prepare those governing documents are knowledgeable about the statutes, and ensuring that you're drafting it in a way that's going to make it consistent with the way that you want to run it. You can always amend it later, but candidly, there's a lot of rules about what it takes to amend it. It usually requires a very high threshold, and it can be a big undertaking. So it's also important to make sure that you're getting it right the first time to the extent that you can. Obviously, things change, but just good preparation before you jump feet first into it is always advisable.
I think you answered this to some extent, but I'll just touch back on it again. Why is it essential for an HOA to be legally compliant?
Well, the thing about a homeowners association is it governs so much. So, your homeowners or condo associations responsible for collecting what are called assessments, which are essentially bills that the homeowners or unit owners have to pay in furtherance of operating what are called the common elements, or which are the things that aren't owned by the individual homeowners or unit owners, but are for the benefit of all those who live in the community. And so there's a lot of money that changes hands. And so it's important to make sure, because some people are spending lots of money, there can be a lot of animosity if people don't like the way that the money is being spent. And oftentimes that is a big cause of disputes. So it's important to understand what you can and can't do with those, how the assessments have to be done. A big thing is, notice. How do we notify people? How often are we supposed to have meetings? Engagement, communication, and all of those things. So there's a lot of things that go on. There's a lot of money changing hands. And because of that, there are all of these opportunities for people to become upset and for things to become confrontational or adversarial. And
Right.
the problem with that is under the statutes, there is an entitlement to attorney's fees when disputes get to the point of litigation. And why that matters is attorneys aren't cheap. And, as a litigator, I completely understand that no one comes and talks to me because things are going great. I've never once had a consult where someone comes in and they're like, hey, really want to pay for an hour consult. Okay, what's your problem? Nothing. Everything's great. I just want to spend the next hour telling you all the things that are going awesome in my life. I've never had that consult. I don't think I ever will. So, you want to avoid having to pay an attorney, but more than anything, you definitely want to avoid having to pay someone else's attorney who's suing you. And so when you have a dispute in an HOA over something that may not even be a big monetary issue, maybe they don't like the way you're noticing a meeting, or maybe they don't like that, your budget is, not the way that they would have liked it. Or maybe you hired a contractor to perform repairs to the community that they didn't like because, their brother-in-law also put a bid in for it or something like that. Those might not be big monetary damages as far as like they haven't really been injured in a meaningful way. They're just upset. But if you're not doing what you're supposed to do and you have a technical defect in the way that you went about that, you could end up in litigation. Then you're stuck paying an attorney. And then if you were wrong on that technical defect, you could end up having to pay their attorney. So for something that really wasn't something that would have cost you anything to do
Something
properly,
minor has turned into
you suddenly spent $25,000, $30,000 because it got into knockdown, drag out litigation because of animosity. And that's the thing, is once you get into litigation, there aren't a lot of vehicles to quickly get out of it. So when you're the one being sued, you can evaluate early exits, and there are some, but it's not always guaranteed because typically there has to be a complete lack of dispute of facts, which if you're arguing is pretty rare to happen. And so if that happens, then you're stuck going along for the ride and you don't have control over what gets done, like everything that gets done, how long it
Right.
goes on for. And so, you just end up piling on all of these costs for something that may not have even been expensive to address. So being in compliance is a really big thing. Another thing that I would recommend for HOAs, be open to communication. Keep an open line of dialogue. Asymmetry of information is one of the greatest ways, I think, to end up in an adversarial dispute and end up spending a bunch of money on attorneys. And, obviously, this may be to my detriment for saying it, but I think a lot of these issues could be resolved if people just put their cards on the table and had a frank conversation early on before they begin getting adversarial.
Cobb Cole represents both sides of HOA or COA. They represent the boards and homeowners in different instances, correct?
Yes.
So in these different instances, what are some of the top reasons why homeowners might seek legal advice?
So I find with homeowners, the biggest things I find them seeking advice about, one of the big ones is elections.
Okay.
They don't believe that the association is conducting elections in a way that's proper. The other big ones are architectural review committees. They want to do something with their property that the HOA is telling them they can't do. And then the third big one I would say would be fines. So associations, assuming they've passed the correct laws and it's in compliance with the statutes, do have the ability to levy fines for certain violations. And so some of those can be as simple as leaving debris outside or causing a mess or, posting something outside of their unit or their home that's not supposed to be there, installing a
Right.
fence without all kinds of things. And that can rub people the wrong way because obviously, I think it's in the South particularly, but property rights are, something that are held in very high regard for people. And I understand, most times your home is probably the most expensive asset and your biggest investment that you own. And so a lot of people don't like to be told what they can or can't do with something that they've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on and sometimes more.
Right.
So I would say those are probably the biggest ones. And, those are ripe for dispute because elections, fining procedures, and architectural review are also governed pretty robustly by the statutes and are usually a pretty big component of the governing documents. So there's a lot of area for dispute because there's a lot of things you have to make sure you do properly in order to be in compliance.
Got it. From the HOA or COA perspective, as the HOA or COA, what are some of the biggest mistakes that they make as a board that you've seen?
like I said, going back to those three things that I just discussed that
Mhm.
homeowners often see you for,
Mhm.
those are a lot of the big ones. Not having, proper mechanisms in place to
Mhm.
levy a fine, not having proper mechanisms in place for the denial of an architectural review submission, election procedures as well. Especially if you get, an overzealous, board member who really just thinks that they, have the community's best interest at heart and really just want to
Maybe they don't.
perpetuate their candidacy. So those are a lot of the really, and again, it's because those things are very specific.
Right.
While you can have your declarations deviate from some of the statutory requirements, there's typically in the statutes kind of a minimum requirement for what needs to be done. So there is a floor to how minimal you can make certain things like notice and procedures be, quorum requirements and what have you. And so, there's a lot to navigate. And if you don't understand it, you can trip over it. And so,
Right.
I think a big thing that, would be advisable for especially board members is if you're getting elected, I would say even before you're elected, familiarize yourself with the statutes and the governing documents, because you don't
Mhm.
want to step into a job where you don't have where you don't know what the instruction manual says. I mean, you got to know what you're getting into. It's like if I wanted to go and get into transactional work, I would start reviewing more transactional law before I start to because I can't sit there and give people advice or tell people how to navigate those things if I myself don't understand it. And so
Right.
I think it's really important for people who want those roles and want to be involved with their association, become familiar with those statutes. They're all available online. It's all public knowledge. I mean, if you just type in Florida Statute 718 or Florida Statute 720, it'll take you to the page, the Senate website or the state website, and it can show you all of those statutes and you can review the rules and things like that. And that's very informative. And your declarations, you can request that from your HOA. They're required to provide it to you. And in fact, a lot
Mhm.
of these now have websites where you can access those documents
Right.
online. They're also usually available in the public record because they have to be recorded. So there's easy ways to access those documents. And I think that even candidly, homeowners and unit owners should familiarize themselves with the rules as
For
well
sure.
to make sure that they're not taking actions that may run afoul of it, because next thing you know, you're getting a deficiency letter in the mail and they're threatening a fine and you don't know what to do and you're panicking and you're trying to make a phone call and trying to rectify it. It just it creates a perfect environment for, resentment, miscommunication, and like I said, an adversarial proceeding, which is just going to cost people money.
Educate yourself.
Exactly.
On the homeowner side of things, what should a homeowner do to prevent conflicts, or something they can do from their perspective to make sure that they don't have a reason to come in
Sure, and
to talk?
like I said, communication is key.
Mhm.
If as a homeowner you have questions, I would encourage you first, like I said, review the statutes, review the governing documents to see if you can answer your question.
Mhm.
If candidly, I think the best way to do it is, again, asymmetry of information is what creates animosity, in my opinion. So if you have a question about how the governing documents work or how something is supposed to go, I would encourage you to reach out to the board and discuss it and say, hey, I want to do this. Like, how is this supposed to go? Maybe you don't agree, but maybe you do, and maybe you can avoid the issue entirely.
Right.
A big thing that I would recommend in those regards with respect to those communications, if you can do it in writing, that's always best, because then, you have a record. So I always encourage people to document those questions and communications. While I hope it doesn't become adversarial, in the event it does, those can be very helpful
Right.
for reasons like estoppel and other things like that.
Mhm.
But I think communication first and foremost. And if you don't agree with what the answer is that you're getting from the association or the management company or whomever,
Mhm.
at that point, then it may be the time to go talk to an attorney. But at that point, you've had a communication, you understand where the association stands,
Right.
you've reviewed the documents, you have an understanding of how it's supposed to work. And that should also help streamline your conversation with an attorney, because
Yes,
you're
for
already
sure.
kind of apprised of what they're saying, what you're saying, and you kind of have an idea of the statute, which will make
Mhm.
it easier for the attorney to be able to say, okay, you think this, you think that. And then he can kind of lay out what he thinks the rights are, because everyone kind of understands what the situation is. And I find that oftentimes that can also lead to a faster resolution, because if everyone knows where everyone stands and you get good counsel involved, the attorney should have a basic understanding of the issues, and hopefully that will help guide it to a resolution rather than protracted litigation, which doesn't benefit either side.
Right. Right. I have sort of a wild card question for you, not to do with HOA, COA. more in connection with you being a local in Volusia County. So as a local to Volusia, what is something that you haven't seen yet in the community that you'd like to see? Maybe a business, maybe a park, maybe whatever it may be. Is there something that we're missing that we don't have?
That's a good question. Because we are getting a lot of, neat stuff around this area in particular. I know there's a new Italian place down the street.
Yep. Haven't tried that yet, have you?
I did. I just went last week. It was good. Still like feeling things out. I don't
Yeah.
think they quite
As
have.
you do in the first couple weeks, yeah.
They run out of stuff, but
Yeah.
but everything was quite good. I know, obviously Northwest Square opening up was a really I love the idea of like kind of an incubator sort of thing. I guess if I had to pick something though, I really love Henry's Depot down in Sanford, and I think it would be really cool in this area to have more of like a food truck pseudo incubator
That's
kind of like
exactly what I
food
want to come
court.
to Delange.
So I think something like that, just because I like to cook and I love, all the mom and pop restaurants. I moved here in '05. So I remember between '06 and '08, '09, the turnover on Woodland was just crazy with restaurants. And,
Right.
you go and you'd be like, man, that burger was really good. And then you go back and the
It's
place
not
is
there
gone.
this time.
And so I think we're finally getting, a really good stable of like consistent fixtures as far as restaurants. But
Yep.
I think it would be fun. Obviously DeLand does stuff downtown all the time. We just had the Asian Street Food Fair and all of that. So there's
Lots of
always like
festivals and fun things.
there's always these transient events
Yep.
that come through, but I think having something more consistent in this area would be good. Because I also know that because of the growth that we're currently having, a lot of multifamily, a lot of new construction, we're getting a lot of those corporate chains, and there's nothing wrong with that. But,
But if you're looking for the local charm,
and I mean, what? The office has spent the last week spamming votes on best southern Main Street and for
did we
some
win? Did we know yet?
I don't think they've announced it yet, but
I thought it was supposed to be today.
but the big appeal is, obviously it's Southern charm, it's history, you have the Athens Theater. So I love the idea of just giving, a platform for more locals to get to, potentially springboard their own endeavors. And like I said, as a foodie, I mean, I just like the opportunity to, try some different food and potentially, watch the rise of a new restaurant.
Have you been to the one in Winter Garden, the Crooked Can open air market there?
Oh, of course. I love the butcher
I love
there.
it. That's what we need. We're going to plant a seed now. And tell
it's
people
great.
that
I mean,
that's what we need.
well, I mean, for example, like, the two breweries over on Georgia, that was great because like we needed something like that, especially to add to, 𝘍𝘍𝘍𝘍𝑐𝑠's and stuff like that. And
Yes.
really makes for a great spot for the market. You got Bake Shop right there. I mean, I actually bought my mom a painting from one of the artists that we featured because it was a painting of the alley, and that's where I go and grab lunch with my mom a lot of
Aw.
times. So, I think that area is just so important, I think, for the lifeblood of the area. I just think adding more businesses that could make that an even more popular spot would be even better.
So you see something like that coming in downtown somewhere.
I would like to. I mean, with where my mom works, I'm sure if something like that was coming up, I would
You would
hear about
probably
it.
know about it.
Mostly because I ask her all the time,
Discreetly.
much to her dismay. But I'm always kind of curious, like, hey, what else is coming? But yeah, I mean, that would be great. But I mean, honestly, like, I don't really have to leave Volusia County a lot. To me, it has a little bit of everything you want. I mean, you have the beach on one side, you have, more forest and, rivers and all of that stuff. If you go to the other side, it has a little bit of everything. There's lots of history. I love the old Florida look along the beach personally. Like I hope that they don't try to sanitize it and make it too modern because I don't know. I just kind of like that 70s, 80s charm that it has.
Okay, so I have a couple more questions for you before we wrap this up. What should a potential or incoming new client expect out of that first meeting that they have with you?
Well, as a lawyer, I don't make things. I'm not a contractor. I'm not a chef. I don't make you food. Like no one leaves with anything tangible when you meet with like an attorney. So, and I understand that. So all I have is knowledge, information, advice. And so, my goal is to, even if I don't necessarily give someone the answer that they want, because I can never guarantee that. My hope is that I can at least give them enough information that they understand the situation that they're in. They feel empowered to make a decision that they believe is the best course of action for them, because I can't, unfortunately, make that decision for them. My goal is to only tell you, I would give it maybe these odds, or, here's the pro, here's the con, here's how long I would generally expect it to take. And the hope is that I can provide enough information about the potential inputs that they can make the best calculation for them. And, I'm one of those people where, I may go a little too far with the information, but I just want to make sure that everyone leaves with, the full universe of knowledge that they may need. And the other thing is, if it is a situation where maybe even I can't help them, maybe the goal isn't to fix this problem. Well, then how can I put them in a position to make sure that maybe this doesn't happen again? It's all, litigation, if you're the defendant, is all about damage control. And I think if you're meeting with someone who, is seeking to file a lawsuit, it's about setting expectations. We don't have a crystal ball. If anyone did, they would be a very, very successful attorney. And, really, when you talk about going to things like jury trials, there's so much uncertainty. You're going to have 6 people who you've never met and won't even know until day of that are going to make a decision about it. And the only thing your attorney is going to get to know about them is what they can glean from maybe 5 minutes of very, very basic questions. And then they're going to have to hope that this person likes your client, agrees with you, understands what you're talking about, which is a big factor. And then you got to hope that they can piece all of that together and agree with you. And, that's a big ask.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of uncertainty. So, particularly with plaintiffs, it's explaining those things. Another big thing I think to consider in litigation is, often these are, issues with money. Well, are you suing someone that doesn't have any money? So
Right.
those are big questions and things like that, I want people to understand. If I'm being completely honest, I think if you're doing your job as a litigator, the first, 10, 15 minutes of a consult may be discussing all the reasons why it may not be a good idea to either, continue in litigation or file a suit in the first place.
Right.
Because, I think as a litigator, our job is, to provide that business perspective, that return on investment perspective. And that's not to say that you shouldn't file a suit if it doesn't make business sense. There are lots of reasons that people want to get into litigation. I'm certainly not going to criticize those, but at least from the dollars and cents perspective, that's something that's more objective that we can provide some insight on. If it's still important and it's worth more than the money, that's fine. That's not to say that it's not a suit worth bringing.
Right.
But I think it's super important on the front end that clients understand the cost benefit and those inputs, because those are the things that I can probably most accurately estimate at the beginning.
Yep.
Likelihood of success, I can tell you whether or not I think you have a case. But that doesn't mean that a jury is going to agree with me. That's not
Right.
going to mean that there's not additional information that may come out later that changes that analysis.
Right.
So I think really the biggest goal is a general expectation of how long is this going to take? Do I have a claim in the first place? How can I avoid this happening again? And what are some potential avenues to not get into litigation that may result in a resolution? Maybe there's a middle ground that people haven't considered. Like I said, a lot of people come in and want money. Well, what if there's a middle ground? What if there's, you do this and I do this, and then we can kind of go our separate ways. So, looking at the problem from all angles and providing people with perspective on how an outcome might look can sometimes help people make decisions that, or, reach conclusions that they may not have otherwise come to. And sometimes that can short circuit things before it gets out of hand. And that's usually my goal.
So, a couple questions for you before I let you head out. What do you think sets Cobb Cole's litigation department aside from our competitors?
Well, particularly on a local level, I would say it's the full service nature of the firm. We have some phenomenal attorneys in the more transactional areas, environmental, land use, construction, zoning, trusts, estates, taxes, entity formation, partnerships, things like that. And so, it gives us this great access to these subject matter experts. Because as a litigator, and I half joke about this, but it's not entirely untrue. My job is really just to write the passive aggressive letters. We get a lot of work from clients who see our transactional folks who unfortunately, run into issues with, maybe, someone's challenging an estate or a trust plan.
Right.
Someone's, there's a dispute between a partnership that John helped form or something like that. Or, one of John's corporate clients gets into a payment dispute. So, all of those things. So one, it's great because we can help out clients that are with our transactional folks. But the other part is if we get a case where it's a very technical issue, we have great resources to go and get the right answer with people who do it on a regular basis. Because as litigators, I'm not putting together corporate documents or helping people form an LLC or a corporation. I'm not drafting a trust for someone on a,
Right.
So rather than sit there and have to spend all of this time getting myself up to speed, I have someone who does it every day who I can just be like, hey,
You can
here's
walk
my
next
issue.
door.
Right. So it allows us to, I think, get quicker answers, more efficient answers, and I think it allows us to get more accurate answers on the front end, which I think can help our clients have a better understanding of where they want to take their particular dispute, which I think is an advantage as opposed to another firm who may have to say, look, this is a little outside of my wheelhouse. I can recommend that you go talk to this person. Well, let's be honest. Everyone uses, Amazon and everyone wants a one-stop shop. No one wants to have to hop around to get all the answers. And so I think the ability to come to one firm and to get all of the answers is a huge plus, especially in a market like this where we deal with a lot of local issues, not to mention the fact that the firm is obviously super involved in the community. So those connections are also something that I think are incredibly valuable.
Well, thank you for spending some time with me today, Anthony. I appreciate you being on the podcast.
Thanks.
I have one final question for you.
We'll see.
How should a potential client reach out to you?
Well, you can reach out to the firm. My assistant, 𝘊𝘰𝘮𝘬𝘀𝑉𝑎, is extraordinarily good at what she does. She's very responsive and she's super pleasant. She'd be happy to get you set up with a consult. Otherwise, you can reach out to our receptionist. Either one of them are absolutely wonderful and they'd be happy to put you in connection with me.
Fantastic. Thank you, Anthony.
Thanks.
If you're interested in hearing more about civil litigation services at Cobb Cole, please contact us at 386-255-8171. We proudly serve all of Volusia and beyond, with offices in Daytona Beach and DeLand. Cobb Cole is a multi-lawyer firm specializing in practice areas from land use to employment law. Cobb Cole, your legal compass.
The information you obtain from this podcast is not, nor is it intended to be, legal advice. You should consult an attorney for advice regarding your individual situation. We invite you to contact us and welcome your calls, letters, and electronic mail. Contacting us does not create an attorney-client relationship. Please do not send any confidential information to us until such time as an attorney-client relationship has been established.